A murder and riot wave hits America. A hydroxychloroquine video of doctors pulled off the web. Attorney General Barr crushing libs on Capitol Hill, and so much more coming up. Welcome, my friends, to the Buck Sexton Show. Thank you for being here. I missed you all yesterday. I was out in the countryside. I wish I could say it was, or rather, I could try to say it was family business, but it was family fun. Hanging out for my dad's birthday. We had a great time. Yesterday was one of those days, though, that I very much wanted to be at the microphone. I wanted to be able to address what was going on because of the madness happening all weekend. The Oakland rioters setting a courthouse on fire. A BLM protester killed for pointing a loaded weapon at somebody who had nothing to do with the protest in the street, breaking the law. A series of riots in Portland and Seattle. The madness just continues, and Democrats are doubling down on all of it. We keep reaching the point where we would think, hold on a second, they can't really defend this, right? They must recognize that this, if nothing else, put aside the destruction, the violence, the immorality, the lawlessness. If nothing else, it's a political liability for them. Doesn't that matter more than anything else? Well, it's not a liability as far as the Democrats are concerned if they can just gaslight you into thinking that it's not happening. If they can pretend that the riots in Portland and Seattle are the result of the deployment of federal law enforcement instead of federal law enforcement being a response to it. So they're trying everything. We need to be prepared right now and until this election for the most consistent stream of just the lies that will be told will blow your mind. The media doesn't care. They lied about Trump, said that he was an agent of a foreign power for years. They have no remorse about that. The only part of that story, the Russia collusion fairy tale they're sad about, is that it didn't end with the president removed from office and perhaps even thrown in prison. That's the only part of that story that they find in any way displeasing. They love the fact that they used that at a time of tremendous American prosperity, at a time of amazing relative peace and sanity in this country that they created out of just whole cloth, a fabrication. The president was a puppet of Putin and a traitor to his country. But I want to focus in, if I can, on, because there's two components to this. And Jerry Nadler, who is a joke in every respect, not a funny one. Jerry Nadler down on Capitol Hill with Attorney General Barr today, who is the best cabinet member asset that Trump has. Pompeo is good. You know, Pompeo is kind of the Scottie Pippen to Attorney General Barr's Michael Jordan. I mean, Pompeo is good, but Barr is better. And the way that he's able to deal with these Democrat assaults, we'll talk about that later on. But Jerry Nadler even conflated these two issues of police, federal law enforcement deployment against the rioters and deployment against violence in cities. So these are two different efforts, but they both are tied together in that the Democrat narrative about cops is the reason we are seeing this surge, is the reason we are suffering through this right now. So let me focus on the violence part of it for a moment. I often talk to you about the numbers here in New York City because that's where I am. That's where I grew up. I worked for the NYPD, and I know the numbers here quite well. And they often lead national news broadcasts. So you'll see that New York is up substantially in homicides, in shootings from the same period last year. And we're now in the 7th month of the year. So this isn't like lining up the second week of January and the second week of January and saying, oh, there's a 20% spike in shootings and the spike is 3 more shootings, right? That's not necessarily, or that's not statistically significant at all. We're 7 months in and we're seeing that it's bad in New York, but I'm here to tell you, my friends, the violence is bad in a lot of cities right now, comparably when you compare it to last year. Violence is up. And when I say violence, I'm talking about homicides, shootings and murders that are overwhelmingly with guns. So really the most disruptive violence in urban areas of the country. up in Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Phoenix, New York. And those are just the ones that come to mind. I mean, when you Miami, I mean, you sit here, I looked at the numbers over the weekend, and we are seeing a spike in violent crime in every major city in the country that at least I was able to check out the numbers on. And that's also assuming that all these numbers are really, especially when you're talking about shootings, are really compiled in an accurate and timely fashion. There's a reason that this is happening. There's a reason the country is going through this right now, and it is because of the Democrat Party. There's no other thing that you can point to. And in fact, if you look at what should be happening from a pure numbers and statistics point of view, the country has been on lockdown for months. So you would have far fewer people, far fewer targets for criminals to go after during that period of time. So you would expect that when we have lockdowns in March, April, into May, and still a continuation of lockdowns at different levels right now, while you have all of that happening, shouldn't murders be way down in cities? We've all been stuck indoors for months. How can it be that in a year-to-year comparison, murders are up 30%, 40%, in some cities as high as 50%? And you start to look at the week-to-week comparisons in June and July when lockdowns in some places have ended, and it's up 150, 200% week-to-week, checking 2019 against 2020. There's no way that the Democrats can explain this. And I would say this to you. It seems so obvious that your mind might fight back against this. You might think, and this would be reasonable, well, there must be something else going on here because Democrats have to, they had to know at some level that what they're doing is going to lead to this, that we would be in this situation where the American people are seeing just how reckless and dangerous and stupid the anti-cop narrative really is. But to that, I would tell you, no, don't give them that much credit. Don't assume the genius of your enemy when he's proven to you his stupidity time and time again. Right? What the Democrats are good at is force, lies, narrative creation, and street thuggery. That's what we've seen this year. There's not necessarily a lot of evidence to suggest that they're excellent political strategists. Let's remember, these are the same people who put forward Hillary Clinton and were sure that she was going to win. Okay? So they're wrong sometimes. And I think that they very well may have been way off the, way off the beaten path with this decision to fully back in an election year the mob, right? And look, the Democrat Party is the mob, but they would have to understand at this point, they would have to realize that swing voters in key states are going to see what they're doing and say, hold on a second, I don't want these lunatics to be in charge. You could assume that they would know that the Democrats would understand that, but I think you'd be wrong. I think that a lot of members of the Democrat Party, particularly in the Congress, are honestly quite dumb. I think that they're venal. I think that they have no ability to look beyond the immediate news cycle, never mind even the election cycle. And they just allow the media and Twitter, particularly Twitter, not really Facebook, to determine a lot of their posturing and their positions. The mob, if you allow the mob to tell you what to do, you're always going to be lurching from one thing to another because the mob doesn't have a moral or even strategic core. It's just the consolidation of rage and anger. That's what's mobilized within the Democrat Party right now. So I think the Democrats have put themselves in a very difficult spot with this. That's also why they're trying to focus so much more on COVID, because you can't hide from these numbers. You can't hide from the surge in crime and murders. They can try to lie about it. They can, but ultimately it's indefensible. And so they've now put themselves in a position where, as I've been saying, they're on defense on this issue, and they got a little too used to being on offense with the criticisms of COVID response, and also the racial demagoguery that the Democrat Party has engaged in when it comes to police and law enforcement in this country. So the murder spike is real, and the Democrats are just going to have to lie to you about it in every way possible, and do whatever they can to avoid a public reckoning for the consequences of these actions effectively. And that's that's one part of this. And then you also have the riots that are going on. And in some sense, this is even more insane, right? On the crime issue, what they'll do is what de Blasio, the mayor here in New York, is doing, which is to claim that there's a lot of complicated factors with crime, and they're just going to hide behind that. If they talk about it at all, they'll say, oh, there's a lot of factors, COVID frustration and all the whatever it is. We all know, oh, no, it's because you guys have decided to throw cops to the wolves because you thought that it was a good way to mobilize the left-wing base. And they did. They mobilized the left-wing base. What about independents? What about the people that Joe Biden's going to have to win in Ohio, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Florida, who are seeing what's going on and saying, these libs are nuts. These Democrats are crazy. Not a very good strategy. Not a very good idea. So then you also have the riots, and this is just clear pandering from Democrats. The pretense that this is anything other than the childish rage of Democrat loons. And I'm so happy to see. I've been calling them Democrats for weeks and weeks. As you know, last night, Tucker's show, he refers to them as Biden voters. Who's been calling them Democrats and Biden voters from the very beginning? Yours truly. This is how we should refer to them. This is the way to go. This is how we should do things. Because otherwise it gets lost in this, they're anti-fascists or they're these radical revolution. No, these are Democrats. Democrats who believe that the Green New Deal will save the world, that listening to Greta Thunberg on scientific issues is smart, that socialism will make the country richer, better, and more prosperous, and that Joe Biden is an intelligent and worthy man who should lead the country. They believe all that stuff. They also think that police are racists who kill black men routinely and without consequence, unarmed black men routinely and without consequence. And that's a lie. In fact, one of the most important statistics that you may have heard during Attorney General Barr's testimony in front of the Democrat lunatics today on Capitol Hill is that according to the Washington Post, there have been 8 total unarmed black men killed by police this year. And that includes people who are unarmed but in the process of assaulting police officers. That's what all these protests were about? 8? Every individual who is harmed by police, whether it's lethal abuse of force or even much less than that, should be held to account. But we have national convulsions and the need for a constant conversation in the media when we have 8 unarmed black men, 11 unarmed white men killed by cops. So that means that almost 1 million law enforcement officers should be slandered by the media. This is reckless and absurd and disgusting beyond words. But here's where we see it, friends. Here's where we are. Dig in for the fight. There's no other option right now. You're going to have to fight for the truth every day from now until Election Day. You're going to have to be ready to be called all kinds of names. You're going to have to deal with, if you want to have conversations about this, if you want to get out there and knock on doors or hand out flyers or just post on your social media, or you're going to be open about giving money to a political campaign or candidate, be ready for them to throw everything they can at you. And they're going to unleash hell. We need to unleash hell in response, or else they're going to get their way, which is what this is ultimately all about. The lockdowns, the riots, it all recedes when Joe Biden wins. That's the plan. We know this. And remember this, it doesn't recede because they want us to return to normal. It will recede because then their guy will be in a position to mandate through the force of government what they want to achieve through threats of force right now. That's all. That's the plan. We are seeing it. It's up to us to defeat it. And the first step in that is knowing your enemy. I can't believe we're being evicted from our home that we didn't even sell. That's what Deborah said when she learned that she was the victim of home title theft. This is a crime that can actually cost you your home. Here's how it works. Your home's title's online, where cyber thieves find it. And guess what? Then they forge your signature and then state that you sold your home to them. You often won't find out about this until the eviction notice arrives. That's actually what happened to Deborah in this story. You got to make sure your home's title is protected. That's why I want you to go to HomeTitleLock.com. That's right, HomeTitleLock.com, and register your address to see if you're a victim and don't even know it. Home Title Lock protects you by creating a virtual barrier around your home's title. Use code BUCK at HomeTitleLock.com for 30 free days of protection. That's code BUCK at HomeTitleLock.com. Again, that's HomeTitleLock.com.
It is true. There's violence across the whole country. Do you disavow the violence from Antifa that's happening in Portland right now? There's riots.
That's a myth that's being spread only in Washington, D.C.
About Antifa in Portland?
Yes.
Sir, there's videos everywhere online. There's fires and riots. They're throwing fireworks at federal officers. DHS is there. Look online. It gets crazy, Mr. Nadler.
Jerry Nadler, member of Congress, who was making a fool of himself today on Capitol Hill by going after the Attorney General, not on policy differences, really going after the Attorney General, Bill Barr, as a person, as if he's going to undermine the credibility of this impeccably credentialed, successful lawyer who was already the Attorney General under a previous administration, and nobody thought that he was a hack then. But Jerry Nadler here, back to the violence that we're seeing in cities. Remember, there's violence from criminal activity and violence from riots, which are a form of criminal activity, but different in their origin, right? There's gangbangers doing drive-by shootings, and there's Antifa lunatics throwing rocks and bricks at people and hurting them. And when we see Jerry Nadler confronted here in this video, actually, I know the gentleman who was asking that question, and our buddy DC Drano, Rogan, was also there for it, present for it. So a hat tip and high five to those guys. Nadler does something that seems just beyond bizarre. I mean, you'd say, what? What do you mean there's no, Antifa's a myth? No, this is the gaslighting that you should expect. There's countless instances already of Democrats saying things like mostly peaceful protests when the protest isn't peaceful. Okay, we know this. If you're at a protest and a big portion of it or a group from within it starts attacking cops and lighting things on fire, it's no longer a peaceful protest. It's turned into something else. It's a riot. But this is the game plan. This is what you should expect. The Democrats are going to continue to lie about this stuff. They're just going to lie to you about it. They're going to say it's a myth. It doesn't exist. They're going to gaslight you. They're going to do everything in their power to make sure that they are not held to account by voters who see what's happening in this country and say, the Democrat Party's insane. Okay, good to know. I think I'll remember that when they've got, Joe Biden out there saying, vote for me, I'm Joe Biden. I did a great thing once in a place with the thing, fourscore and life, liberty, and the thing. That's what they want for you. That's the guy they want in charge of the country. They think they tell you he's going to do a great job. He's going to be fantastic. Just put him in power, folks. That's probably the biggest lie of all they're telling these days.
You look at words from Nancy Pelosi. What does she say? She says, this is all Trump's fault. If we were in power, none of this left-wing terrorism would be happening right now. So their messaging is coming from different angles, but it is very well coordinated, and it's this. They're going to hold you hostage. They're going to hold you, the American people, hostage until you give them power. And one more thing about this. How do I know that they just want power? Because normally protesters have some kind of demand, right? There's something that would stop their protest. Because, maybe a policy change. But that never happens. Even when Portland defunds their police, it doesn't stop the mob. They continue because it's power that they're after.
You've got to think of, that was Congressman Crenshaw, and he gets it. You've got to think of this mob as a symbiotic organism to the Democrat Party. They are the shock troops, the paramilitary arm, whatever you want to call it, but they're working together. The only way that you see a cessation of any of this is if far left-wing Democrats are in charge. And now you might say, hold on a second, Buck. Well, wasn't there a BLM movement during the Obama administration? And wasn't there Occupy Wall Street during the Obama administration? I'd say, yes, that's right, there was. And they were trying to demand things from the Democrat Party in power while also silencing voices of opposition and threatening those who opposed the Democrat Party. But they were trying to pull it further left, right? And that was a time of particular anger among Democrats, too. They wanted Barack Obama to go even further toward socialism and statism. But now, right, they're out there. They're not just trying to pull the Democrat Party further left. They want the Democrat Party to be back in charge, so they feel an even greater urgency. Otherwise, how can you explain this? What has changed in Seattle and Portland that make these places so we're going to pretend this isn't linked to the election? Oh, they're still going to act like this is about George Floyd's killing? You've got a bunch of predominantly white protesters, rioters. I do it too because you read the word enough. This is how propaganda works. You read it enough and you'll use it. You have these lunatic rioters out there who are predominantly white that they don't care about George Floyd. They engage in this kind of protest as a part of Democrat left-wing culture. This is a social activity for them. This makes them feel good. This gives them purpose. This also gives them an outlet for what is very clearly a derangement in the era of Trump that is, I would say, a visible mental illness. I mean, these people are actually nuts. And to think you should go and burn down a federal courthouse, why are they doing that? Why do they keep trying this? Why do they light a courthouse on fire in Oakland? It's happening in all of these cities all across the country, cities run by Democrats. Now, I do think that at some level, the Democrats who are savvier understand that they can't control this mob. And so there are those that recognize this is a liability, but a loose cannon can still fire at the enemy, right? Even a loose cannon is dangerous. It's dangerous to everybody, but you just hope that it goes off when it's pointing at the other guys. And now we get to tactics. I think that's a good way to transition into it. I see you have 3 federal agents, and Attorney General Barr mentioned this today during his testimony, 3 federal agents who may be permanently blinded, and we don't know yet, and we don't know the extent of it, may be permanently blinded by the Antifa Democrat base using lasers to fire into the eyes of these federal law enforcement officers. Now, it is already a very serious federal crime, as it should be, to fire lasers up at helicopters or pilots because it can completely disorient and blind them very easily. And the federal penalty for that is severe, as it should be. I mean, people should go to prison for a long time for doing that. It would be like someone's driving a car and you think it's funny or think it's a form of protest or whatever to cover up their eyes while they're on the highway going 80 miles an hour. Does anyone think that's funny? No. Does anyone think that should be anything other than punished to the fullest extent of the law? Of course. Well, no, Democrats in this case think that it's funny, and they think that it should be allowed. They think that firing lasers in the eyes of federal officers, possibly blinding them, is an acceptable form of, quote, protest. I say that this is malicious wounding, and if I thought that somebody was firing lasers into my eyes and I had a sidearm, I got to tell you, I would draw down. I'd say, you do that again. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to risk being blinded? Blind. Going through the rest of your life blind. Because some psycho-lib crybabies who watch too much Jimmy Kimmel and Colbert at night stop playing video games in the morning so they can run out and play make-believe revolutionary and they're going to blind a federal law enforcement officer? I don't think so. I don't think so. The consequences for this should be severe. You had dozens of law enforcement officers in Seattle alone who were 59 cops was the number I saw who were seriously hurt over the weekend. And in response to this, you know what the Seattle City Council's come up with? They've banned the use of non-lethal or less than lethal crowd control measures. That's right. That's what they've done. They have decided that you're not allowed, if you're cops, I'm talking about now, your cops are not allowed to use pepper spray, tear gas, anything like that. So take away their tools. Just turn it into a free-for-all wrestling match where the bad guys get to use batons, bricks, bags of feces, lasers, fireball bearings with slingshots, which have gone deep into the skin of federal officers. I mean, they're firing weapons at people. They're trying to blind people, and morons like Pelosi and Nadler are acting like this is a civil rights protest, that these are moral giants who are speaking up for the oppressed. The Democrat Party is disgusting right now. Disgusting. And the people who support it are being disgusting. Oh, but anything in the era of Trump, whatever it takes, whatever we need to do, it's just lies. You know what they're saying the problem is here now? Because there's too much video. As much as the media, they're lackeys at CNN, another place, just full of just the worst, the most superficial, vapid morons on planet Earth are anchors and correspondents at CNN and MSNBC, but CNN's worse. The worst. The absolute worst. You know what they're all claiming now? The Democrat Party, along with them, Democrat members of Congress, Pelosi and Schumer and the rest of the disgusting moron brigade. They're claiming that the problem here is Trump. That's right. These cities are up in flames. There are riots happening in some cases for weeks and weeks on end. And the problem is Trump.
This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is about America and the proper role of law enforcement. I hate to say it, but it looks like this president is doing a dress rehearsal for martial law, sending in federal forces to take over police duties in city after city for political purposes. It is frightening, and it's making things worse. It has not improved public safety. It has decreased public safety.
Ah, there you go. There you have a perfect example of what I'm talking about. That's the mayor of Seattle. Well, remember, there was an autonomous zone set up, and the mayor went along with it. Jenny Durkin. It's a good thing that she exists, because then at least de Blasio has a credible claim to not being the worst mayor in the history of mayors. But it's a tough fight right now between Antifa's little errand boy, Ted Wheeler in Portland, and Durkin up in Seattle, autonomous zone Durkin. And then Lori Lightfoot, who is unable to come to grips with the reality of a city that just has a violence problem that makes a lot of war zones seem safe by comparison. So what's really going on here? To say that this is a dress rehearsal for martial law is really stupid in a way that's it's hard to fully wrap your mind around. How could anyone say anything so dumb? Especially because what we've seen is during the COVID pandemic, and they've been saying that Trump was a fascist and Trump was going to institute martial law from the very beginning. But what we've seen during the COVID pandemic is that if you were trying to come up with an open door for tyranny, an open door for instituting an authoritarian regime, you were trying to do those things, you couldn't do better than COVID-19. We're now, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but where you have the governor in New York, seeing photos of people doing things and calling them out and saying, oh, I'm going to have to make sure there's more restrictions now. Your freedoms are going to go away because you're not listening to me. Oh, so now we have collective punishment because someone throws a party somewhere. I can't leave my house. I have to wear a mask outdoors. We'll get to that. But this is, it's never factored in at all because they don't care, because it's not about the truth. It's about power. The Democrats never tell you, well, hold on a second. They never admit that Trump has responded to the biggest opening for tyranny in this country, certainly since 9/11. And it's a much bigger opening than even that was, by saying, hey, let's let the states make as many choices as possible. We'll backstop them with PPE, with unemployment funding for workers who are out of jobs, and let's get them back up and running as soon as possible so people can go back to living their lives. That's what Trump, the fascist, has been doing during COVID-19. What about all the Democrat politicians who say that Trump is a fascist or that he's trying to institute martial law? What have they been doing? Making highly politicized, biased decisions. They'll shut down churches, but they'll keep the weed stores open. They'll allow mass protests about the killing of George Floyd and BLM, but they won't allow you to go to the funeral of a loved one. No, that's not. Won't allow you to be by the side of a loved one who's dying in the hospital. Nope, not allowed. Not allowed. What does tyranny really look like? Look at some of the Democrat governors and mayors and how they approach this COVID pandemic, which they are now just extending the rules and regulations on so that we don't even know what it's like to be normal anymore. And the madness continues in Portland and Seattle and these other cities. And what do they tell us? Oh, it's Trump's fault. In fact, they're even getting, it's even getting more ridiculous than that. I saw NBC News running a story just yesterday. NBC News. Oh, it's a serious news channel. You got to remember, these big news channels, they used to have the audience all to themselves for news, and they don't anymore. And they're really just the vanity news divisions created by corporate entertainment conglomerates for the amusement of their executives and to make them seem like a more serious and more worthwhile brand. NBC News full of jokers, full of clowns. These places are not impressive. Don't ever think that, because it's the three letter broadcast networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, they're the serious. No, they're exactly the same as CNN. It's all the same now. Same as CNN, same as MSNBC, because the world of news has been so. Well, it's that it's been exposed. It's not really corrupted. We just know what the truth is now. Thank you in large part to social media, because these idiots tell us who they are, and then they say, I didn't say that I'm a Democrat. Oh, well, we can read your Twitter feed there, buddy. But what did they say at NBC News? They focused on how right-wing extremism is a rising threat in America. Oh, they're going to do more of this. Get ready for it. This is going to be, it's straight out of the playbook. At a time when the left can no longer ignore. It's just too much. It's too heavy a lift. The lie is too complicated. At a time when the left can no longer ignore the destruction in cities, the sense of helplessness and hopelessness that many major cities, all in Democrat hands, are currently going through. What do they do? Well, what is their next move? Try to find a way to blame, obviously, Trump. Talk about martial law. Yeah, that's right. Federal officers enforcing the law is martial law. No, it's just the law, Democrat idiots. But while that's happening, while that's going on, they also add to it that there's a concern over right-wing terrorism. I even saw the car ramming as a tactic of right-wing, neo-Nazis piece. What was that? A number of weeks ago. But now we see that there's going to be this effort to create an equivalency. Both sides have crazies. Look at the crazies on both. No, these are all their crazies. These are all libs, but they're going to try. And just you watch. This might end up being one of my better predictions. They will find either a counter-protest group or one individual somewhere, and they will and they'll get him to say something that's a little bit a little bit too aggressive, or I don't know, just something. It doesn't matter. They'll find someone. They're going to try to claim that right-wing extremism is also look what they did with the George Floyd protests, which turned into riots and arson and looting and mayhem. For days, there were stories in major news outlets about these were right-wing agitators engaged in false flag operations. That has been completely forgotten about now. People never, you go back, you check it out. It's absolutely true. Some of the biggest news organizations in the country, we've seen reports that the burning down of Minneapolis is happening because of right-wing agitators from out of the state. Nope, that was all a lie. But it gave them a little breathing room, right? It gave them a little ability to, I don't know, maybe, you can't really have people telling the truth about this because we don't really know what's happening. Get ready for more of that. They're going to find a way to make it seem like there's blame on both sides here, that the riots and arson and looting and murders that are happening in these cities are somehow tied to the Republicans. They're blaming Trump, but that only works for people that think Trump is guilty of everything. Trump is responsible for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Trump is the reason that the Roman Republic fell. I mean, Trump is, for some people, they're so deranged that it doesn't matter. Trump's responsible for everything. And they go, yeah, that's right. It's Trump's fault. But that's not going to work with anyone else who's paying attention to what's happening in the country. So the next move will be, there's right-wing extremism too. The MAGA supporters out there, they're just as bad as Antifa. I know it's crazy, my friends. Just wait for it.